What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And today we are going over the top 8 of Pro Tour Edge of Eternities. We did do a Day 1 and Day 2 breakdown where we go over the Day 1 metagame, the standings at the end of Day 1 and Day 2, the win rates for all the decks that were registered between Day 1 and Day 2 of this Pro Tour, and some of the news that was announced for the future of Standard and the future of competitive Magic in general. So if that is something that interests you, go ahead and check out that video before you get to here. But we are going to be covering the top 8 of this event. That means we're going to go matchup by matchup, kind of give some keys to that matchup and what players are probably thinking of going into their top 8 matches, in the quarters, semis, and finals. And we're just going to be breaking down the bracket because honestly, this was a pretty fun Pro Tour to watch. Unfortunately, with kind of getting set up for some things like my personal life, it was very hard to kind of watch this all unfold in real time. I had to basically 2 and 3 times speed through a lot of the semifinals, finals, and some of the quarters as well to kind of get an idea of what happened here. So really unfortunate, but what I did get to catch, of course, looked like a lot of super fun games, even if Belcher does kind of give me an aneurysm watching people play it, because it just tends to make me sad. It ends up being one of those decks where I feel like if I play it, my draws are just absolutely awful, or I just probably make a lot of the wrong decisions, and watching other people play it, it just looks like it's absolutely the best deck of the format, so a little bit of foreshadowing there for you. But before we get into this top 8, and we can go ahead and break it down, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we do event breakdowns such as this for the Pro Tour and for the World Championship, as well as other videos pertaining to the modern and standard format. If that is interesting you, please consider subscribing and ring the notification bell so you know when videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And if you want even more content, you can check out the description down below. I have a link to my Discord server, a link to my Twitch channel, a link to the Casual Spiked Podcast YouTube channel, and a code in the description down below for the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. Manatraders is a monthly subscription service that you can use to rent cards on Magic the Gathering Online to play in their various different competitive leagues and events to potentially qualify for the regional championship or even the Pro Tour. If any of these deck lists interest you and you don't want to necessarily fork out the money up front to actually acquire these cards and maybe play them in paper, you don't even know if you want to play them in paper and you want to try them out online first, Manatraders is the perfect opportunity to do so. It is a lot cheaper than trying to buy every single card for every single deck. On top of that too, you're able to swap out and try out different decks. Maybe you decide that I don't like playing the Belcher decks, I want to go and play Amulet Titan, whatever the case may be. You have that flexibility with Manatraders, and if you use my code in the description down below, you will get 5% off your monthly subscription. I want to thank Manatraders for being a sponsor to the channel, and let's go ahead and look at this top 8 bracket from Pro Tour Edge of Eternities. So here's our top 8 bracket from Pro Tour Edge of Eternities here. We're going to start top to bottom in the quarterfinals here as we have the 1 and 8 matchup between Justin and Makoto. Is it Prowess versus Esper Blink? The top player on these brackets are the players that get to be on the play for these matches. So Is it Prowess versus Esper Blink? Conveniently for Makoto, he's like, I think they said he was the only Esper player not playing Solitude, which is huge if you're on the Is It Prowess side. Obviously, you're going to end up wanting to be a little threat light in favor of having a bunch of spells that you can play to, kind of get some advantage, getting to play like Corey Steelcutter, trigger like the Prowess and, Super Prowess on your Slick Shot show-offs. And you really want your Slick Shots to especially go unimpeded because those are going to be the creatures that end up dealing the bulk of the damage, or ideally a lot of the damage, because you cast a few spells, all of a sudden it's coming in for 7-9 damage, potentially even more. And Solitude, especially Solitude plus Ephemerate, is kind of a huge blowout if you're like the Is It Prowess players. And we saw a lot of Aspergorio, we saw Tameshi Belcher, which does have 2 decks kind of representing in the top 8, or I guess 3 between the 2 most registered. Funnily enough, as also like no Boros Energy either, which was the 3rd most registered deck. But nonetheless, I would say, at least for the Is It Prowess player, this does seem very favorable, especially when your Esper opponent is not playing Solitudes and is more on the, Fatal Push and like actual like removal spells and that sort of thing. But that's kind of the keys for that, is like the Esper Blink player just essentially not putting the shields down, especially not putting the shields down when you have Solitude, and just Is It Prowess trying to play functional Magic. Now, this wasn't our feature match for the event because we don't play, one quarterfinal, then the next one, then the next one. They do play all quarterfinals simultaneously, so we had to come in for Game 5 of this 2-2. From the sounds of it, it sounded like Justin actually lost a game where he was on the play, and then ended up winning game 4, I believe, to bring it back to a game 5, where he was on the draw. And there came a key point in the game, and I've kind of talked about it with some friends. Justin, I believe it was turn 3, had a Dragon Rage Channeler in play. Dragon Rage Channeler played a spell as an opponent, actually Fatal Pushed it, ended up surveilling a card in the graveyard, drew a card, wasn't a land, the surveil card wasn't a land either. I believe it ended up being a Corey Steelcutter, and then we cast Expressive Iteration. Now, there's a Teferi in play, so we really kind of want to get this off the board, at least you have the ability to, but we don't have our 3rd land, and I believe that Justin had a Monastery Swiftspear in hand, so and players have open deck lists too, so he knows there isn't a Solitude to be worried about. Basically, looking at 5 cards, completely missing on lands, and it just kind of snowballed from there. While the Is It Prowess deck can operate a lot on 2 to 3 lands, ideally in those matchups that play out more play out grindier. If he was playing against something like Amulet Titan or Tameshi Belcher, then probably would prioritize doing damage over hitting land drops, just because you don't have a lot of time to mess around with things like Expressive Iteration. Also, I don't think Expressive Iteration would be in the deck post-sideboard as well. So really unfortunate there, just kind of snowballed, and unfortunately... I say unfortunately for me because I am a huge believer in this Is It Prowess deck. Ends up losing to Esper Blank without Solitude, the only Esper player not playing Solitude. So the 8 seed does take down the 1 seed 3 games to 2. And, a great run for Justin, again, being the first player to qualify for the top 8. Just came up a little bit short. Honestly, played the numbers game, and honestly, I think that, Justin kind of going for it there, I think ends up paying off hugely if you end up hitting the land. You can just do so much more. You have the ability to double spell a lot more often so that you can kind of play Corey Steelcutters and play additional lands, which Corey Steel is definitely going to help you out big time in these Esper Blank matchups. So, a little unfortunate there. Then we have Francisco Sanchez versus Mason. I'm not even going to try that last name. So this is Azorius Control versus Amulet Titan. Again, another match that went to 5 games here, I believe, with Azorius Control ending up being on the play here. So Amulet Titan is where we're going to start, and I give a huge sigh because there's so much going on with this Amulet Titan deck. So easily one of, if not the most complicated deck that you can play in the modern format. It is not for the faint of heart. This is not a deck that you just pick up and play and have success with. I think if you learn some of the basic main lines, maybe you'll be okay, but this is a deck that really rewards you for going really, really, really deep on some of these lines. I talk about Dom Harvey and his essentially Amulet Titan manifesto, novel, whatever you want to call it, is literally everything that you need to know about the Amulet Titan deck. It's essentially the Bible for this style of deck, which is crazy that it's been around that long, where you could literally write a real thick-ass book based on just lines of play and some of the logic and stuff that you use playing this Amulet Titan deck. But essentially, the ideal scenario for Azorius Control is that they're able to keep amulets and spelunkings off the battlefield. You want to limit the amount of mana that the Amulet Titan player has. A lot of the ways when you play Azorius Control and just playing Control X in general is kind of having your spells and your mana just completely overloaded. And when your opponent is able to make a ton of mana and you're not able to keep the amulets and the spelunkings off the battlefield, your opponent is going to be able to make a ton of mana. They're going to be able to play a bunch of lands to then, again, force their spells through, not by actually having them resolve, but by presenting so many things that need to have answers, that need to be countered, that and the fact that the deck has such a great top deck ability that you could just end up having enough interaction for what your opponent has, and then you pass the turn, you draw a brick, and then they draw a Titan, and they're able to go off and make infinite Titans and go through their entire loop, whatever. Of course, we also have Scape Shift, which is they're going to allow to sack their lands and then go get any combination of lands they want, end up making a ton of mana and finding ways to win the game that way. On the Azorius control side, there is actually a really quick way that they can kind of win the game while your opponent does have Boseiju, which is at 3 copies in this Amulet Titan deck in specific. We have what's called like the Scepter Chant lock. So there's Isochron Scepter, you enchant an Orum's Chant, or you enchant it. You imprint an Orum's Chant underneath of it. Then you're able to pay 2 mana, tap it, make a copy of the Orum's Chant, and then you can actually kick it. So you stop your opponent from casting spells, and with the kicker, you stop them from being able to attack. Of course, the Boseiju is an activated ability, so you are able to disrupt the Isochron Scepter from there. Within a lot of cases, if your opponent has that lock in play, especially with a Teferi on board, it's, you're locked out of the game, and then they can go and play their stupid Kahira that they have as their companion and kind of beat down that way. Again, this was another game that went the distance, went to 5 matches here, and it looked like the Amulet Titan player was able to stick an Amulet at times and end up getting removed, but just really couldn't get anything going, and Francisco didn't actually have to put in the Isochron lock, or at least it wasn't like immediately clear to me, like kind of watching it super fast, getting to this point, that they had the Isochron lock, but just kind of kept enough things off the battlefield, keep everything at bay. Again, kind of doing what we talked about here, just denying the Amulet Titan, all the mana that it could ever want to cast its 6 mana spell, and then cast like Green Sun Zenith for 7 total mana to go get their 6 mana spell, and so on. So Azorius control, I think surprisingly, beating Amulet Titan, I think I'd rather be on the Amulet Titan side of things. There wasn't any Cavern of Souls either in the Amulet Titan decks, which I don't think you would necessarily play Cavern of Souls necessarily in this metagame here. I think that your Amulet Titan or your Primeval Titan is very likely to just resolve a lot of the time anyway, and you kind of don't care because you just have so many other things going on where, like, if Titan gets countered, again, you have Scape Shift, and you have the infinite mana generation of like an Amulet or a Spelunking in play with the ability to loop the stupid mill creature that, of course, I'm completely blanking on because I'm on like 2 hours of sleep. Azorius control moving on to play Esper Blink in the semifinals, which I think is actually a really interesting matchup, and probably not the matchup that a lot of players thought we would have in the semifinals of the Modern Pro Tour. Next, we move on to Miko versus Johnny. This was the actual feature match, so we saw all 5 games once again of this matchup here, and this is Tameshi Belcher versus Espergorio, and Espergorio, as the weekend went on, I thought was just kind of like in general, when I covered the deck in a separate video, about a week or 2 ago, I thought of Espergorio as this combo deck that's using Goryo's Vengeance, that's trying to get back Atraxa or Gristlebrand, and then keep it around with Ephemerate, that it was this kind of Reanimator deck that had a mid-range game plan. And really, over the course of the weekend, it just felt like Espergorio was slightly worse of a mid-range deck than something like Esper Blink, but just had kind of this punch to kind of go over the top, and just a different way of having card advantage, where Esper Blink, you'd see things like Overlord of the Baelmerk, and then you see like Phalia and like Flicker Wisp and Ephemerate to kind of get card advantage that way and get some big monsters around to really stick around on the battlefield and get them, way above rate. Espergorio is kind of doing this with things like Cosmic Riddler, Cosmic Riddler, doing it, of course, with the Atraxa and Gristlebrand that we talked about here. But Tameshi Belcher is just kind of like this slow-moving, unstoppable force. It's like Juggernaut from X-Men, but, Juggernaut is stuck going like 10, I could say like 10 miles an hour. It's still pretty fast for a guy as big as Juggernaut if we really think about it. But, it's just this slow-moving, unstoppable force that you're just going to have to find a way to kind of, run Tameshi Belcher off of the bridge. Like, they just have to take away their ability to read road closed. If you want to try and win this matchup. In general, Tameshi Belcher, again, is just going to try to get to 7 mana to play and activate Belcher in the same turn. They don't play any actual lands in their deck. They're all MDFCs or modal double face cards. So it's essentially, again, like the slow march for the Tameshi Belcher player, and it's Espergorio figure out, okay, what's the lines of play that I need to take to try to end this game. I think it really starts with trying to resolve Agorio's vengeance on something like Gristlebrand or something like Atraxa, and then just finding your interaction from there. You're playing Solitudes, but Solitudes really don't do too much against like just the regular Belcher plan. It does kind of help you out against the Tameshi part of the deck, where you just kind of want to loop things like Lotus Bloom over and over again to generate a ton of mana so that you can enable more things to do, like instead of just having 7 mana where you just hard cast a Belcher and then you go and activate it, you end up generating a ton of mana so that you can potentially play maybe one of the lands that you played as one of the spells that you played as a land, or even getting to be able to War of Invention for your Belcher and then activate as well. So there's just kind of a few things that you can do with the Tameshi Belcher deck, and Espergorio went down quickly 2-0. This was a matchup that Johnny had played before against the same player, and I believe they said he was like 3-1 or 4-1 against Tameshi Belcher. Just couldn't beat Miko, and was quickly down 2-0 against Miko in the pre-board games. Moving towards the sideboarded games, ended up actually winning, that game 3 on the play, winning game 4 on the draw, and looking very closely, Johnny ended up being, I believe, 1 damage short in the top 8, or excuse me, in the first game, or I'm sorry, the second game, my goodness. Ended up being 1 damage short in the second game. And then like a few different ways of like actually stopping the Belcher player from going off, and was even kind of close and looked pretty bad there in the beginning of game 5, but then started to kind of go his way, and then ultimately just ended up kind of falling apart, and Miko just ended up putting enough Belchers in play, and Johnny didn't have enough answers, and actually ended up winning the match 3-2, Tameshi Belcher over Espergorios. And then looking on the other side of the bracket, Noe Offman versus Di Benedito Plummer. Simic Neoform versus Tameshi Belcher. This is the matchup, if you watch the day 1, day 2 breakdown, where I was really, 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 really hoping that this would somehow end up in a tie, or the players end up having to play like 15 games of Magic, honestly. I absolutely despise Simic Neoform as a deck. Tameshi Belcher is a deck that like I can partially live with, just because there is a lot of decisions that have to be made playing this Belcher deck, and especially with Tameshi, it's just kind of like a way that if your opponent can't really interact with you, you're probably going to win the game anyway if your opponent didn't have any interaction. But like Tameshi Belcher just firmly slams the door shut and gives you a lot of options to finish the game, where Simic Neoform is just the deck that can kind of go off like on turn 2. And this might be one of the worst matchups, I'd say, for Simic Neoform, just because if your Neoform ends up getting countered on your Allosaurus Rider, you've already invested 3 cards. You've invested the Allosaurus Rider plus 2 green cards, or even potentially using like Summoner's Pact to then go and get the Allosaurus Rider. So you've invested 3, potentially 4 cards into this, and then a 5th card in Neoform, and then sacrificing the creature that you have as an additional cost to cast it. And if that gets countered, you're just so far behind on resources. And while the Tameshi Belcher deck is a combo deck that wins a few turns later, you're going to need more than a few turns if you end up going for it as the Simic Neoform deck. Now, you're not totally without any interaction. You are playing things like Pact of Negation, and you are able to play through 1 or 2 pieces of interaction here. And of course, you're not worried about paying those upkeep costs, because you're just going to win the game anyway by putting a giant Galta into play, and then putting in a Xenagos God of Revels to give it, plus 13, plus 13 in haste and trample, or rather the Galta already has trample. You end up just hitting your opponent for a bunch of damage, and you say sayonara. Now, this one also went the distance, 5 games here, and Tameshi Belcher ends up beating Simic Neoform. Honestly, a lot closer than I thought it would be. I believe this Neoform deck is playing main deck copies of Consign to Memory, which is very helpful against Tameshi Belcher deck, countering a colorless spell or a triggered ability. So you're able to end up countering either like Tameshi activations where, I guess it really doesn't do like that great of a job of doing it. But nonetheless, you have some options. I mean, especially just by countering like the namesake of the Tameshi Belcher deck, or at least half of the namesake of the Belcher deck, which is good enough, on top of also the synergies that you get from, playing something like Consigned Memory in your main deck with packs especially, because you can actually counter the triggered ability that says that you have to pay whatever cost or you lose the game. So, and then the fact that it has Replicate too, meaning that if you end up kind of playing a bunch of packs out and it doesn't work out, like, you have the ability to just counter all of them and kind of continue on with life here. So pretty interesting to say the least. So for those of you keeping track here, we'll shift over to the next part of the bracket here. So shifting to our semifinals here, we have Makoto versus Francisco, Esper Blink versus Azorius Control, and then Miko versus Di Benedito on the Tameshi Belcher mirror. Esper Blink, Azorius Control is, again, not the semifinal match I think anybody probably had on their fantasy top 8 Pro Tour bracket here. But is very interesting. Again, this Esper Blink deck is focusing a lot on playing cards like Overlord of the Baelmerk, using cards like Phalia that have flash that can also just, exile non-land permanents and return them back to the battlefield, meaning that you have this combo where you could play a Phalia on your opponent's end step, and then play an Overlord of the Baelmerk, attack with your Phalia, exile the Overlord, of course, after getting its ETB trigger, and then at the end of turn, you're going to be able to return the Overlord to the battlefield, get another trigger to mill cards, and then get a creature back from your graveyard to your hand, which allow you to be pretty aggressive with your Solitudes, because you're just able to kind of recur them pretty easily. And then on top of that, too, Phalia ends up growing larger and larger. You can do this with things like Flicker Wisp. You have these MDFC creatures that you can flicker out with Flicker Wisp. Doesn't necessarily work out with Phalia, but if you can flicker out a Flicker Wisp, you can kind of do the same thing. And just in general, do some pretty neat tricks with the Esper Blink deck. We played quite a bit of like White-Black Blink not too long ago, probably like a month or two ago. And it's a fun deck to play in general. I think a lot of the Blink things that you can do with this deck are a lot of fun, and especially in Esper too, because you get to play a lot of really good blue cards as well. But of course, we have Azorius Control on the other side. Again, the big thing about this Azorius Control deck is just locking your opponents out of the game with Isochron Scepter plus Orum's Chant kicked, plus getting Teferi in play. One lock piece that we did not talk about was actually the Narset plus Gaia Reach Sanitarium. So Gaia Reach, you can pay 2 and tap it. Each player draws a card and then discards a card. Narset, Part of Reveals, says that your opponents can't draw more than 1 card on each of their turns. Or really on each turn. So on your turn, they can only draw 1 card. On their turn, they can draw 1 card. If you activate Gaia Reach Sanitarium in their draw step, and with how steps work, as soon as you get to the draw step, you immediately draw a card. Your opponent cannot do anything in your draw step before you draw a card. So you're forced to draw a card, and then your opponent can activate Gaia Reach Sanitarium. You're not going to be able to draw a card from the Gaia Reach. Instead, you're going to have to discard a card. And if you have 0 cards in your hand and you're drawing up to 1 in your draw step, and your opponent activates Gaia Reach Sanitarium with a Narset in play, you're not going to be able to have any cards in hand, which is essentially the other part of this lock where, your opponents could technically have the ability to Besage you, which I guess they technically still could do that. But this is also a part of it where maybe necessarily your opponent only has access to instants if you don't have a Teferi in play. But just making sure that they really can't do anything. I guess this is also like, you don't necessarily need then the Isochron part of this. If you just have Teferi plus Narset and Gaia Reach Sanitarium, and your opponent has no cards in hand, they're essentially locked out of playing anything, and you just kind of go on business as normal. Now, this semifinal matchup, I would tend to favor the Esper Blink deck. I think the Esper Blink deck is just super grindy, while you definitely don't want to play a long game against Azorius Control. I think there's probably some tools that the Esper Blink deck really enjoys having in this matchup that I would probably want to be on Makoto's side of the battlefield versus Francisco, and I would immediately be proven wrong, as this game went the distance of 5 games with Azorius Control winning 3-2 and moving on to the finals of the event. Azorius Control absolutely, I'm not going to say dominating, but really just performing a lot better than I thought it would. A lot of players just kind of wrote off Control as being viable, and it was really just up to these kind of like Esper / like Orzhov, like mid-range style of decks that were going to be like the control decks, or maybe even like Tameshi Belcher, just being like these control decks that have a combo finish. And in a way, Azorius Control does have that, like lock you out of the game, and then kind of, with their combo isn't necessarily winning the game, but, playing counter spells, putting in their lock, and then slowly winning the game over time. So Azorius Control maybe found the recipe for finding success in the modern format once again. Then we go over to this Tameshi Belcher mirror. This is a marathon, not a race. While both decks can win the game very quickly, on like turn 3, turn 4, or maybe even turn 5. The big thing here is not rushing. You have both players playing interaction. They have various different ways of kind of sculpting their hand and getting to the point where they are going to be able to try and go off potentially through some interaction here. And really, you don't want to be the first person to blink, because if you blink, then you better hope that your opponent does not get the chance to open their eyes, because if they just kind of stop you from going off, if they are able to counter your Belcher and then, win a counter war that way, there's a very good chance that on the other side, they're going to be able to play their Belcher, and you're not going to have any interaction or very light on interaction, to where then that Belcher player is going to be able to go off. So it's definitely just kind of the staring contest of like who's going to be willing to go for it when, and what are the chances that, their thing resolves and they're able to activate and win the game here. And for D. Benedito Plummer, they are the one that came out on top of the Tameshi Belcher mirror match, 3-2. So through 6 top 8 matches, we've went the distance going 3-2 in all of them. And unfortunately for us, Tameshi Belcher does make the finals, meaning that we are hard rooting for Azorius Control in the finals here. And for whatever reason, the Play MTG channel did not upload the last part of this bracket, for the finals, and then who ended up winning. So I'm just going to let you know right away that our hero, Azorius Control, did not perform very well in the top 8 here. So in the finals here, actually getting swept 3-0 by Tameshi Belcher, being the second Pro Tour in a row, at the very least the second Pro Tour in a row, where we had a sweep in the finals here, and Tameshi Belcher, in the hands of D. Benedito Plummer, ends up winning the Pro Tour Edge of Eternities 3-0 against Azorius Control, with actually a really neat game 3, where D. Benedito actually found the line of returning playing a suppression field to tap down Kihira. So this is a 5-mana MDFC that you end up tapping a creature, and then he took out the Narset to then ultimate Tameo to draw half of his library, round it up, and then from there I was like, okay, like I have my whole deck in my hand, what are we going to do here? So really awesome finals. Congratulations to all the top 8 players, and of course all the participants for the Pro Tour, and this being the last Pro Tour of the season means that we are then geared up for the World Championship. So that concludes the top 8 of the Pro Tour Edge of Eternities. Some of my final thoughts from the event, at least pertaining to the format. I think Modern is in actually a pretty good spot here. We might have seen the end of Boros Energy. Nowhere to be seen in the top 8. It was the 3rd most registered deck behind Espergoria at 1 and Tameshi Belcher at 2. Tameshi Belcher showing that it's not just an all-in, Belcher combo deck, but it does have some play, and there's a lot of things that you can learn when playing the deck to kind of maximize your value and then maximize your chances of winning games of Magic. Neoform, honestly, there's probably cards that need to be banned in Modern, or at least cards that you can make an argument for just being like way too good for the format. I just want to see like Neoform just absolutely get yeeted into the sun, because I cannot stand the fact that there is a combo deck that can win the game on turn 2. And, in specific, every time I play against Neoform, my opponent like turn 2s me both games, and it's like I just never had a chance. Like that, like they somehow like have the combo through every piece of interaction that I have, and I just absolutely hate it. I cannot stand the deck at all. So that's like my biggest gripe, is the fact that it ended up making the top 8 of the event. Azorius Control, potentially back here, turns out just playing as kind of like this control/prison style deck ends up working well in its favor, and instead of just trying to have answers for every single thing that your opponents could be doing in the format, turns out just having them, essentially have this feeling of dread, this impending doom that is just lying in wait in this control deck. Turns out might be enough to put the fear of God into people that are playing against this control deck. Isn't Prowess making a pretty impressive run in general? I think, again, the Modern format is in a very, very good spot here going forward and setting us up very nicely for the regional championships that are going to be taking place in October and November. So definitely go ahead and check those out. I'm going to be going to Regional Championship Houston, taking place towards the end of October. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm so excited to be playing at a regional championship in my personally favorite format, and I look forward to potentially seeing some of you there as well, and just getting to play some Magic. It's been way too long playing an in-paper event, and I'm looking forward to getting back to the regional championship. And who knows, maybe I'll be on the Pro Tour. Maybe I won't be able to cover day 1 or day 2 because I'll be in there playing. Now, that's probably unlikely. There's going to be probably like 800 to 1,000 people at this regional championship, only 32 spots, but you never know. It would be really exciting to do so. But, if you want to kind of see some coverage leading up to, of the Modern format leading up to the regional championships, as well as, again, more news coming to the competitive ethos of Magic, we're going to be going over some of the news that was announced more in depth later this week. Hopefully, as long as we have the time for it, I would definitely love to do so. So definitely go ahead and subscribe, check all that stuff out. If you want any of the lists from the top 8, I'm going to have the article from the Play MTG website posted in the description down below, so go ahead and check that out. But that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.